The Giants and the Mets may have just quite literally played the craziest baseball game that I have ever seen. Joc Pederson, an absolute hero in this game. We'll talk about it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, guess what we're going to talk about? The Giants and the Mets just played an epic game. Epic. I mean, that is the understatement of the year, even calling it epic. 13-12, the final score. Giants had, 19 hits, and the Mets had 18. There were 10 runs total scored in the 8th inning. This game was over in multiple directions, multiple times. The Giants had this one in the bag. I was chalking it up as a win. I'm thinking, okay, this is their record, and this game is over. The losing streak is over. But then the Mets came back with 2 in the 7th and 7 in the 8th against Tyler Rogers, and it looked like the game was over in the other direction. The Mets had a 3-run lead in the 8th, and in the bottom of the 8th, the Giants had 2 outs and nobody on base, and they managed to tie the game up with a hit and a walk and a 3-run homer by Joc Pederson, his 3rd home run of the night. And then that wasn't even the end of it at all. So then in the top of the 9th, the Mets get a leadoff triple and end up scoring that run, and they take a lead, and it kind of looks like it's over again, especially in the bottom of the 9th. Giants got the leadoff man on, but then Tommy La Stella hits into a double play. So there's 2 outs and nobody on base again, and they're down a run in the bottom of the 9th. And once again, a hit and a walk. I think it was a hit and a walk. There may have been 2 hits in one of those innings, but they set it up for Joc Pederson again, who lines a single to tie the game, and then Brandon Crawford wins it with an opposite field ground ball to left that brought home Darren Ruff. And that ignores the beginning of the game when Joc Pederson had the 2 home runs leading up to that point. It was just absolutely insane. And, you can read about all the different win probability added numbers and all that. Some of the nuggets I've picked up looking around is that for Joc Pederson, by win probability added, it is the best individual performance since 2016. And I think I read the 13th best all time for a position player. And also the game itself, according to Ben Clemens over at Fangraphs, had the biggest changes in win probability in any game in their entire database going back to 1974. And so we just witnessed something very, very special. And I don't know how to feel about it. I mean, ultimately I feel great because the Giants got this win, but also they were cruising to a victory when they had an 8-2 lead. And once again, the pitching just, here's the thing. A lot of times I feel like we talk about whenever the Giants are struggling, we focus on the offense, but it really hasn't been the offense that has been the issue this season. If there is an issue, they're 23-19. Thanks to this win, would have been 22-20. So a big difference psychologically for me. And if we look at the numbers, actually, there's a couple of things that have gone wrong, and we'll save that what's gone wrong conversation for just a minute. But let's talk about Joc Pederson. Just overall, an historic night for Joc Pederson. He goes 4 for 6. I know a lot of people care about RBI. I don't often talk about RBI because it's context dependent, but in this case, it is context dependent. Guys were on base frequently for Joc, but the 3 home runs and then the game-tying hit in the 9th. So he drives in 8 runs, which is just ridiculous for an individual player in an individual game. So in rare circumstances, we will talk about that. And I mean, just what an epic game. And then we find out after the game, he says that he had just a long conversation with Barry Bonds. Of course, Joc Pederson grew up a Giants fan, grew up a Barry Bonds fan. And so there he is talking with Barry Bonds in the cage before the game. Pederson says he didn't do any of his normal routine stuff. Like he didn't hit in the cage, maybe he didn't stretch. He didn't do anything that he was probably supposed to do. He just got wrapped up talking to Barry Bonds in the cage, and then it ended up moving into the clubhouse, into Mike Murphy's office. And then Pederson looks at the clock and he's like, oh my God, the game is in, he said it was 6:25 or something. The game was in like 20 minutes and he wasn't even dressed. And so he got dressed and just kind of rolled out of bed basically and into the game. And then he ends up having this historic performance. So it's just like a legendary tale and a legendary performance. And Joc Pederson, he is a streaky man. I mean, he was so hot, and then he went down with the little groin injury, and he was really struggling since coming back. And it's been about 3 weeks that he's been back, and he's been hitting the ball hard lately and getting some results. And man, were the results there tonight for him. So he wasn't the only one. The Giants did have 19 hits in this game. They drew 6 walks in this game. So just an all in all, great performance by the offense. But coming up next, I want to shift our attention a little bit to the pitching and why it shouldn't have got to this point. And something just happened that hasn't happened in a negative way for the Giants in over 20 years, and it happened last night. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But first, with spring in the air, it's a time of renewal and growth, personally and professionally. As your small business grows, LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonmlb. That's linkedin.com/lockedonmlb to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, as promised, we're going to talk about why, as great as this game was, and I don't want to take anything away from it, it never should have got to that point. The Giants were cruising to a victory, and it wasn't to be. It was not to. I mean, look, at the end of the day, you'll take the epic memory over a cruising victory, right? Like, we would never remember that game down the road if it just finished off the way it looked like it was going to finish off. So I'll take the memory, but still, something's gone wrong here with this team. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast. Recaps of MLB games with analysis from our local experts, taking fans through the season like no other network, free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yeah, if you want to hear my raw reaction, about a minute long, the Mets hosts raw reaction to that game in about a minute form, all put together from all around the league, you can check out the Locked On Now podcast every single day. So, what has happened that hasn't happened in 20 years, over 20 years for the San Francisco Giants? Well, for the first time since May 2000, at Coors Field, the Giants allowed 10 or more runs in 3 consecutive games over their last 3 against the Padres and then the last 2 against the Mets. And that's the problem, right? If you're allowing over 10 runs a game, good luck trying to win those games. And somehow the Giants were able to do it last night, but that's kind of the exception. And so what has gone wrong? I mean, if you look at the Giants' earned run average as a team, it's just flat out too high. And we spent a lot of yesterday talking about how there was a lot of luck involved, and I stand by that. They've got a 4.46 team ERA, which is right. They're directly behind the Colorado Rockies, and that's just unacceptable. The Rockies play half their games on the moon in Denver, and the Rockies are at 4.71. The Giants are at 4.46, so there is a bit of a gap there. But 4.46 for this Giants pitching staff, they should. I'm just trying to light a fire under them. They should be embarrassed by that. That is way too high for the talent that is on this team. And when we look at the peripherals, I mean, they've got a 3.38 fielding independent pitching, over a run better, and all these other peripheral numbers, the xFIP. We talked about all of this yesterday, so I won't go into too much detail about why the peripheral numbers are like indicating that they've been unlucky. But part of it is not luck. Part of it is defense. And some of you have pointed this out on Twitter. And yes, I agree. I think I talked about it yesterday as well. The defense factors into this. Like basically, if you're a way below average defensive team, you're not converting these balls in play into outs as often as a even average defensive team. And I think we've seen some of that with guys like Darren Ruff in the outfield just not getting to some balls that maybe a faster outfielder would get to. And then some hard hit ground balls that aren't counted as errors necessarily. Like Kevin Padlo had a very rough defensive game yesterday, and we've seen some of that from Wilmer Flores. We've just seen Thairo Estrada let a ground ball kind of eat him up yesterday that he should have charged and converted into an out, but it wasn't technically an error. But the defense for the Giants has actually been quite bad, according to a lot of different numbers. And so that is a part of it. There's no doubt that that's a part of what's going on here with the Giants just simply allowing too many runs. And last night, I mean, it wasn't Logan Webb. Finally, a starting pitcher was able to strand a lot of his base runners. You know, that's part of the issue too. And that's part of that is just luck. Like we've talked about this a million times, but at the end of the year, teams are going to end up stranding about 72% of their base runners. It just always comes out to that. And for the Giants, they're at 67.6. So about 5 percentage points of runners are not being stranded as often as you would expect. And that's part of what's going on. But for Webb, I mean, he was able to strand some guys last night, but it was Tyler Rogers who kind of fell victim to the ball in play. A lot of the balls that were put in play against him in that crazy, fateful 8th inning in which the Mets scored 7 runs. I mean, Tyler Rogers pitched a third of an inning and he allowed 7 runs on 7 hits. And Camilo Duvall came in and allowed 2 hits. So the Mets had 9 hits in that inning. It's just kind of crazy stuff that you don't normally see. And we're seeing it seemingly on like every single night for the Giants. Like they just can't, like when's the last time? It just feels like almost impossible for this team to go out there and have a starter go 7 shutout innings and have the bullpen go, a shutout, and just with any kind of consistency. And let's think back too to the beginning of the year when a lot of people, the preseason talk was that they're going to be like a pitching and defense team and that the offense isn't going to be that good, but they're going to win with their pitching and defense. And after a few games, I vividly remember on the post-game show, that's kind of what they were talking about. And it just goes to show you, because we are at that point where we're about 45 games in, and I've said all along, that's about the point that we can take a first hard look at the team and really have learned some things. And that's one of the things, is that that's really just not how it's been. They have not been a pitching and defense team that squeaks across 3 runs and tries to win that way. They have very much been a team that has actually scored a lot of runs on the season, and their runs per game is among the highest in the game. Their team weighted runs created plus is among the highest in the game. But the earned run average is what's bad, and the defense has been what's bad. So go figure in a lot of ways, right? But when I look at the peripheral numbers and I see that they should be getting much better, and that the results should have been better based on those peripheral numbers, then I become a little bit more encouraged about moving forward. But we just haven't seen it. They haven't been able to put it all together in a game recently and for any kind of extended period of time. And so it looked like last night they might finally just cruise to a nice 8-2 win, but it wasn't to be. But it did become an epic game, and so I'm not going to complain about that. So coming up next, I'm going to talk about who specifically has been hurting them defensively and if there's anything they can do about it. I'm also going to look ahead to the schedule and make some perhaps predictions about the next few games for the Giants and how things might have turned around in a positive way with last night's victory. All right, as promised, I want to talk about specifically what's going on with the Giants defense and then look ahead to the schedule and even make perhaps a bold prediction. So when we look at the defense, I think it's worth pointing out that the defensive metrics, there's a lot of hocus pocus mystery out there about defensive metrics, right? People don't really get specific when they're talking about these numbers. They're like the defensive metrics. Then I'm not sure they know what they're talking about. So it's worth like diving into what is behind these numbers. And the thing is, there's a bunch of different ones we look at. For me, I do not care about fielding percentage. It's really a shame that we're in 2022 and we're still talking about fielding percentage as how you evaluate a defense. I think it goes without saying that that is not a great way to evaluate a defense, and I'll tell you why. Because range, just as an example, if you've got a slow left fielder, say, and there's a ball in the gap and he just lumbers and it falls, that's not an error, of course, because he couldn't have caught it based on his physical limitations, and he didn't drop it. It's only going to be an error if it like hits his glove and he drops it. Whereas if you've got Steven Duggar out there, he sprints over, gets there in time, the ball hits his glove and drops out. That's an error. It's literally the exact same ball, but the faster guy gets hit with an error while the slower guy doesn't, even though he should have got there if he was more capable. And let's say Duggar catches it, right? And then you don't credit the guy with an error, even though he made a much worse defensive play. He didn't get an out, and Duggar was able to get an out because of his speed. So we need to factor in like range as part of this equation. And so there are a number of efforts out there to calculate defense. There's defensive runs saved, which is done by Sports Info Solutions, which is out in Pennsylvania. And they've just got a team of, quote, scouts who like watch these games and rate the different defensive plays. And that gets put into defensive runs saved. And then ultimate zone rating, I actually don't even know exactly. This is UZR. I don't know exactly how that's done, but it's not just like, I think there's a lot of mystery. People don't understand that there's people behind these numbers. It's not just like some computer is spitting out numbers. That's more outs above average, which is based on StatCast, which is great because it's not affected by natural error in humans, right? The StatCast is measuring like, where did a guy start? Where did he finish? Where was the ball gonna be? And it also is able to look at what do other defenders do on similar, when they have to cover a similar amount of ground in a similar amount of time. And then they formulate it into this outs above average number. And for the Giants in outs above average, they are 27th in baseball at -14. And what I wanted to say about all this is that I think it's good to look at all of them. Because if one is saying you're good and one is saying you're bad, what does that mean? Well, for me, it means we need to just kind of weigh them all and say maybe they're in between. But when you're bad in all of them, it should give us a pretty good indication that you've been a below average defensive team. And that's what we're seeing with the Giants. At -14 outs above average, the worst, there's 3 teams tied at -15. So the Giants are right on the doorstep there. And in terms of defensive runs saved, the Giants are 29th out of 30 teams at -22 defensive runs saved. So ultimate zone rating, they have this thing called ultimate zone rating /150. And what that does is it gives your ultimate zone rating per 150 games. So, because you can, it wants to account for differences in playing time. So it's basically putting everyone on the same scale, which is what we do with all kinds of rate stats, like batting average is scaled. It's a rate. It's not like just your hit total, right? The hit total, we can look at that, but we want to know what is your rate of doing these things. And for the Giants in ultimate zone rating per 150 games, they're at -6. I think this is set as -6 runs above average. I'm not sure. I need to look into that. But the point is, they're towards the bottom again. They're 26th out of 30. So everywhere we look, they're in the bottom 5 in the league in these categories. And I would say that that matches up with what I've seen with my eyes. What's funny is a lot of these defenders are the same people who were here last year who are hurting them. It's Darren Ruff. It's Wilmer Flores. Like when we look at, let me just say outs above average. You've got Crawford, Yastrzemski, Slater, Luis Gonzalez in center field, Austin Slater in center field, as well as Austin Slater in left, as positive outs above average, but everybody else has actually been negative in this category. Surprising to me is Thairo Estrada, -1 out above average, but -9 defensive runs saved. That doesn't really match up with what I've seen. And this is an example where in defensive runs saved, he's -9, but in outs above average, -1. And so these are very different. And so I don't just look at the -9 and say, that's it, -9. That's end of discussion. I kind of say, well, and the ultimate zone rating is not so bad either. Joc Pederson in right field. That's the thing, is it's putting everyone at every position too. The worst has been Luis Gonzalez in right field. There definitely were some plays that he didn't make, but I do believe that he should be able to turn that around. Wilmer Flores at third base, -3 outs above average. Darren Ruff in left, -2. So it's kind of like across the board. Wilmer Flores at first, Darren Ruff at first, Wade, La Stella at third, La Stella at second, all negative. So it hasn't been good defensively, and it's something that they're going to have to fix. Otherwise, it's going to continue to hurt their run prevention, and they're going to give up 8 runs a lot, as it's just part of the deal when you're bad defensively, is you're going to give up more runs. So that's that. I want to look ahead to the schedule and make what I was just saying was perhaps a little bit of a prediction. So for me, this game today against the Mets is big because the Giants are then going to Cincinnati after this. And Cincinnati has been one of the worst teams in the game. They're 12-30. They've just been abysmal. They've been outscored by 74 runs. They've been bad at home. They've been bad on the road. They've just been bad. And so that is a series that you absolutely expect to win. I was going to say must win, but look, they're never must-win games until they're really must-win games. It's hard to have a must-win game in May, but that's who's coming up next. So if you can win today against the New York Mets, and they're throwing out a rookie, a guy who's very unproven, decent prospect, left-handed pitcher, so the Giants will have that righty lineup. We will probably see Kevin Padlo and Stuart Fairchild in the lineup today, so don't be surprised there. But Padlo, I just must say, had a pretty rough game, especially defensively last night. But so you've got Jacob Junis on the mound, not your best pitcher either, but it's a game that you can win against the New York Mets today. And if you do, you've won 2 in a row. You would be 24-19, and you're heading to Cincinnati. And so for me, I want to see them win these next 3 games to get us to that 45-game mark, which would put them at 26-19. So I'm not calling that per se, but I also don't think that is too far-fetched to imagine. You just win a game against the Mets, which, by the way, would be a huge series win after a bad first game, a second game that could have been an absolute gut punch, but they pull it out. And then you can just win a series against a good team today. And you're at home. You really should be winning these series from at least sometimes. And it just hasn't gone that way recently. And then you head out on the road and play arguably the worst team in the National League. And you honestly could easily sweep that series. And then you've won at that point. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I want to see them at 26-19 at that 45-game mark, and things would look a lot better than they were looking a couple days ago. So that's all the time we have for today. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to have reaction to this game today, Mets and Giants. To me, a big kind of pivotal game. Do they go back to their losing ways, or can they turn the corner and head out to Cincinnati on a high note? So I look forward to tomorrow's podcast and getting to talk about that with you. So thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. For your second listen, make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast Locked On MLB on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Stay Locked On Giants.